I remember the day as though it were carved in my memory by the tip of a cosmic blade. It was my birthday, though few people would have guessed it from the setting I chose to celebrate. A rundown space bar located on a distant mining station orbiting the dim star Allure V, the place was known as the Rusted Comet, a name that suggested it was once beloved, or at least frequented by adventurers, now reduced to hosting a smattering of half-interest patrons who only found their way there out of desperation or chance. The neon sign above the door flickered in and out, and the recycled air carried a metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat with each breath. Dim overhead lamps swayed in a perpetual half-broken dance, making the corners of the bar vanish in darkness as though space itself had invaded the edges. I was there alone initially, until Lucas, an old friend and sometimes partner in ill-advised escapades, joined me. He had promised me a grand birthday celebration, but so far we had only managed to drift into the fringes of the galaxy in search of some ephemeral excitement or a stroke of fortune. Neither had come. I settled for synthetic whiskey, an unremarkable beverage that tasted like warmed engine oil and left me with a gritty aftertaste. But on that birthday night, even that was better than facing my gnawing sense of failure. Lucas, tall and wiry with a narrow face and narrow ambitions, thrust a small glass vial under my nose and told me about an experimental drink. My first reaction was to brush him off. It wouldn't be the first time he had tried to rope me into something questionable. However, the lure of novelty combined with my mounting frustration at life's general unfairness wore me down. The swirling azure liquid inside the vial shimmered beneath the dying lights of the bar. It resembled a tiny swirl of the cosmos, as though a galaxy had been captured and compressed within that fragile glass container. "Don't be a coward," Lucas said, half laughing, half daring me. "It's called Dream Sunder. Just one drop is supposed to send you into the most realistic illusions you can imagine, or so rumor has it." His grin was lopsided, as though he wanted me to plunge into the unknown purely so he could watch the fallout. Yet behind the mischief, I saw curiosity dancing in his eyes, hinting that he believed something momentous might happen if I dared to imbibe. I took it, swirling the contents of the glass with my synthetic whiskey, steeling myself. The color deepened, turning the liquor into a shimmering cobalt ocean. With a wry smile, I raised the glass to my lips and downed the concoction. The initial burn was fierce, far more intense than any spirit I had consumed. My vision blurred around the edges, turning the bar's interior into a watercolor swirl of shapes and colors. I remember hearing Lucas's voice, oddly distant and distorted, congratulating me with faint applause. The last thing I sensed before darkness claimed me was a dull thud, my head hitting the tabletop, and then there was nothing at all. When I opened my eyes, I was on a floating city suspended in a sky of swirling gold and copper clouds. For a moment, I believed I was still in the throes of some hallucination, or perhaps I had been thrust into the afterlife of some obscure cosmic deity. Yet as I willed my eyes to focus, I discovered the city was constructed of gleaming metal spires connected by bridges that pulsed with an emerald glow. The wind was gentle, carrying a floral aroma that I could not identify, sweet and slightly alien, reminiscent of petrichor from worlds I had never visited. The floating city itself was a marvel of architectural impossibility, its towers twisting upward like the horns of some celestial creature, each spire crowned by pointed turrets that shimmered in the luminous sky. Beneath the transparent plating of the bridges, I caught glimpses of entire ecosystems, lush forests, flowing rivers, and flickers of brilliant light that might have been insects or minute creatures unknown to human senses. Dazed, I walked across an ornate platform and came upon two large statues, both seemingly carved from a glimmering stardust-infused stone. One statue depicted a robed figure with an outstretched hand, as though offering a gift, while the other stood in a combative stance, 1 foot forward, arms raised in defiance. Between them was an empty pedestal, and I sensed an air of anticipation in the atmosphere around it. The sky seemed to darken slightly, as though a cosmic curtain had been drawn to signal the beginning of some ancient rite. From nowhere, a booming voice rang out, echoing across the spires. "Stranger, you stand upon the days of judgment. Answer truthfully or face the ire of the ancients." My heart leapt into my throat, Some part of me still believed this was a dream or a simulation triggered by the experimental liquor, but the sensation of that breeze on my skin, the very real sense of gravity, and the pang of hunger beginning in my stomach suggested otherwise. Still, with a surge of bravado that likely came from my confusion, I shouted back something irreverent about how I didn't appreciate theatrics. Before I knew it, the statues began to move, or so I thought in my shock, each turning slightly, the robed one seeming almost disappointed, the combative one tensing as though preparing for confrontation. A flash of green light emanated from the platform, and I covered my eyes. When it subsided, I found myself no longer alone. Standing before me was a procession of exotic figures clad in regal attire. At the head was a resplendent being I assumed to be Princess Serafina, a tall, elegant alien woman with opalescent skin that shimmered with subtle lavender undertones. She wore a diaphanous gown woven from silver threads, each thread glinting in the luminescence of that strange sky. A crown adorned her head, composed of precious metals and stones that flickered with an otherworldly brilliance. Her eyes were a bright liquid silver, and when they fell upon me, I felt an unexpected jolt. I, in my disheveled, drunken confusion, had no notion of protocol in this bizarre environment. Instead of bowing or even managing a polite nod, I uttered a slurred remark about being unimpressed by fancy-dressed illusions. My words echoed, and a hush fell over the entire assembly. The princess's entourage stared at me with expressions ranging from shock to outrage. Yet Princess Serafina herself maintained a curious calm, as though studying a rare creature for the first time. A moment later, a man stepped forward, clearly a high-ranking official or possibly Serafina's father, given the regal robes and the manner in which the rest deferred to him. He spoke in a tongue that at first I did not recognize, but as I listened, as though some translation device had clicked into place in my mind, the words began to form in standard. "You stand before us on the day of the Festival of Accord, a sacred rite that has endured centuries," he declared, voice trembling with contained anger. "By your disrespectful mockery of Princess Serafina, you have triggered an ancient edict, one rarely invoked in living memory. This edict states that any outsider who insults the reigning princess within the boundaries of the royal dais shall be bound to her in marriage, so that peace and understanding may be forged from insult." I blinked, struggling to comprehend. "Pardon me," I mumbled. "I must have misunderstood." "You heard me correctly," the man continued. "You have offended the bloodline of the great ruler, he who stands beside the princess or faces immediate execution." A hush spread over the crowd, which seemed to grow larger by the minute. Floating orbs of light hovered overhead, reflecting the intense scrutiny of the onlookers upon me. I recall stammering in protest, disbelief etched into every fiber of my being. "This is insane," I said, stepping back. "I don't even know who you people are, and I'm not about to marry a complete stranger." My voice rose in panic, but not a single soul stirred from their place. Instead, a circle of robed guards tightened around the dais, their ornate staves humming with an energy that suggested they were more than mere decoration. It was at this point that I truly realized I might not be caught in a mere hallucination. The risk felt too real. The grand stage, the imposing spires, the audible gasps from the crowd, even the dryness in my throat and the knot forming in my stomach hammered home the seriousness of the predicament. If this was indeed reality, how could I possibly extricate myself? Princess Serafina, thus far silent, stepped forward. Close up, her alien features were even more striking. Her elongated limbs, shimmering hair coiled high on her head, and eyes brimming with an intelligent, if guarded, curiosity made for an imposing presence. She spoke softly, her words somehow laced with an echo that resonated through the clearing. "I do not wish to marry a man who so clearly does not know our ways," she said, voice tinged with an otherworldly melody. "Yet our laws are not to be trifled with, and the punishment for violating them is severe." I opened my mouth, fumbling for words. "Wait, no, hold on. Let's think about this rationally," I managed, hopping to find some hidden clause that would allow me to escape. Her father, his features stoic and unreadable, stepped forward again. "If you refuse the union, you forfeit your life under the ancient code," he pronounced. "If you accept the union, you will fulfill your obligations to the crown, but you will also assume a mantle of great responsibility." Stunned, I tried to negotiate. "Isn't there a third option?" I asked, fighting the tremor in my voice. "Banishment, an apology, maybe a fine." The crowd seemed almost insulted at the suggestion that one could pay a fine to remedy an ancient, sacred law. A ripple of disapproval moved through them like a wave. With a grave expression, the monarch raised his hand, forestalling further uproar. "You have until the next phase of the celestial cycle, at dawn tomorrow, to decide your course," he decreed. "Guards, escort him to the temple of reflection that he may meditate upon his actions and discover the seriousness of his transgression." At once I felt several pairs of hands grip my arms. The guards, tall and robed in shimmering azure cloth, marched me away from the dais. The crowd parted, allowing them passage, while they stared at me with contempt, confusion, or pity. I could not tell. My protests died in my throat as we passed beneath an archway of carved platinum vines, and then crossed a footbridge that spanned a breathtaking vista of swirling clouds. If I had not been so terrified, I might have been overwhelmed by the sheer splendor of it, but my mind raced, searching desperately for solutions. At length, we came to a cylindrical tower whose walls seemed to ripple as though made of liquid metal. A single door slid open, revealing a stark interior lit by ethereal orbs floating in perfect orbits around the circular chamber. Inside, a simple pallet lay against one curved wall, and no window was visible, though a skylight high above allowed golden light to filter in. One by one, the guards departed, leaving me in uneasy solitude. As the final guard left, the door closed seamlessly behind him, leaving not a hint of a seam or handle. I was sealed inside. I paced that chamber for what felt like hours, trying to piece together how I had come to be in such a predicament. Could I be hallucinating? Every sense in my body told me otherwise. The dryness of the air, the lingering hum of distant machinery, the faint floral aroma that drifted through vents, all of it was too vivid for a dream. Perhaps I had been whisked away through some accidental cosmic slipstream, or maybe the experimental drink had unlocked some hidden portal. The only certainty was that I was here for now, and I had to figure out how to survive. Eventually, I sank onto the small pallet, exhaustion claiming me. The day had been too much. My last coherent thought before sleep overcame me was to wonder whether Lucas was still at the rusted comet, or if he had unwittingly been dragged into this madness as well. When I woke, the golden light from above had dimmed to a soft glow, suggesting some form of evening. The air was cooler. My stomach roared in protest, and as though on cue, the seamless door slid open with a whisper. In walked an attendant, another alien albeit less grandly dressed than the princess's retinue. She carried a tray of food, delicate fruits in a rainbow of colors, steaming bowls of fragrant grains, and a glass of crystal-clear liquid that glowed faintly. She set them down before me without a word, then stood aside, her gaze lowered in apparent respect. I ventured a greeting, feeling ridiculous. "Hello," I said, voice cracking with thirst. She nodded politely but said nothing, gesturing for me to eat. I took a bite of one of the colorful fruits, impossibly sweet with a texture like a cross between a peach and an avocado, and found it not only palatable but unexpectedly energizing. The grains were hearty, reminiscent of barley with a savory sauce drizzled over them. The water, or whatever it was, refreshed me more thoroughly than any beverage I had known. When I finished, she bowed and departed, leaving me alone to ruminate once more. The remainder of the night passed in a blur of internal debates. One part of me thought to run, the where I could not guess. Another part of me actually considered the unthinkable. Perhaps I should obey this law, if only to stay alive long enough to find a better solution. By the time the rosy hues of dawn glowed through the skylight, I had no definitive answer, only a series of half-baked plans and a gnawing sense of dread. The door opened again, and a pair of guards stepped in. They made no threat but motioned for me to follow. So I rose, the aches of my prior day's confusion subsiding somewhat, and allowed them to escort me through the towering spires once more. This time the floating city was alive with activity. Sky ships, crafted with hulls of glimmering metal and powered by unknown energies, drifted between the tall spires, ferrying goods and people of all shapes and sizes. The wind carried musical notes, a distant hymn performed by unseen choirs. Market stalls brimmed with exotic wares, shimmering fabrics, glowing crystals, and mechanical devices that seemed to defy known laws of technology. Yet the moment onlookers caught sight of me guided by royal guards, whispers and sharp glances quickly followed. Eventually, we arrived at a grand auditorium, the walls formed of swirling metal patterns that seemed to shift with the changing light. Inside waited the princess and her father, the great ruler, whose expression was impassive. A semicircle of dignitaries stood behind them, cloaked in the regal blues and silvers that signified their high standing. Princess Serafina looked at me with a blend of curiosity and guardedness, as though uncertain how I might behave. "Ethan Kane of Earth," the great ruler intoned, "have you considered your fate?" I drew a shaky breath, my mind reeling with the memory of the guard staves and the unyielding tradition. "I have," I began, trying to keep the quaver from my voice. "And while I don't relish the idea of forced marriage, I value my life. I will not say no to your law." There was a murmur in the assembly. I saw flickers of relief or possibly satisfaction among some of the nobles. Princess Serafina's gaze flickered, but her expression remained carefully schooled. The great ruler nodded. "Then it is decreed. You shall undergo the betrothal rites in 3 days' time at the High Temple. But know this, the union is not merely ceremonial. You must prepare yourself to fulfill the responsibilities of a consort, to stand beside Serafina in matters of state, culture, and tradition. And should you violate our ways again, your fate shall be sealed." The next days rushed by in a whirlwind of alien customs, elaborate ceremonies, and endless etiquette lessons. Court advisors besieged me with instructions: how to address each noble, the significance of each color in their clothing, the proper stance during each bow, and even how to walk through the city's sacred arches without disrespecting the spirits believed to dwell there. I was introduced to more courtiers than I could count, their names and titles swirling in my mind like an incoherent stream of data. To my surprise, Princess Serafina made an effort to teach me personally, albeit in short, polite sessions. She seemed aloof yet not unkind, guiding me through the labyrinthine halls of the palace and explaining the meaning behind the intricate mosaics that adorned the walls. Each mosaic told a story of her people, from their mythic origins among the stars to their triumphant construction of the floating city. When she spoke of her heritage, her composure melted slightly, revealing a fierce pride and a heart that beat with equal measures of love for her people, and a sense of responsibility that weighed heavily on her shoulders. One afternoon, I found myself in a grand library, a domed chamber brimming with shelves of glowing tablets and ancient scrolls. The air was perfumed with the subtle scent of old parchment. Serafina was there, studying a large tome inscribed with flowing calligraphy. I cleared my throat politely. "Your Highness," I began, still awkward with the formal address. "I wanted to apologize for insulting you when I first arrived." She turned, her silver eyes narrowing slightly. "You were frightened," she said softly, "and confused. I imagine none of this can be easy for you, but our traditions are older than we can trace, and for better or worse they govern our actions. We must abide by them." Our eyes met, and for the first time I sensed a strange resonance, as though each of us was trapped by circumstances beyond our control, both trying to uphold our dignity in the face of an ancient mandate. I ventured a small smile. "I can see that you have a deep connection to your people," I said quietly. "I'll do my best not to offend you or them any further." She nodded, returning her gaze to the tome. "I believe you," she answered, "though belief must be tested by action. Now let me show you the story of the fifth spire. It is said that our ancestors built it in a single day when they first discovered the Arc crystals. This knowledge might help you understand why my father so fiercely upholds our laws." She went on to explain that her father, King Aurelius, had once been a beloved prince who championed reforms. But as time passed and tradition weighed upon him, he became more rigid, determined to keep the peace through strict adherence to ancestral codes. "He is not unkind," she murmured, "but he is afraid that if even one stone is dislodged from the foundation of our law, the entire city might one day fall from the sky." In the nights leading up to the betrothal, I found myself more entangled in the palace's intrigues. Whispers in the corridors spoke of rival factions, old feuds between powerful families, and dissenters who believed the monarchy should evolve beyond the ancient ways. Some whispered that Serafina herself had, in private, advocated for change, while others insisted she was as rigid as her father. The question on everyone's lips was whether the forced marriage to a stranger, an off-worlder, no less, would serve to unify or to fracture their society. To my relief, I discovered that Lucas was also in the city, though under house arrest of sorts in a separate wing of the palace. Apparently, after I had vanished, the same phenomenon that took me had whisked him away, depositing him in a courtyard among startled courtiers. He was being detained until the authorities could determine if he played a part in my indiscretion. I managed to secure permission to see him once, and his disheveled appearance and frantic expression betrayed his fear. "Ethan," he hissed when the guards finally allowed me into his room. "What in the name of all the black holes in the galaxy is happening? We were in the rusted comet celebrating your birthday. I gave you that weird shot, and the next thing I know, I'm here in some kind of alien prison. They're telling me you're to marry their princess. This is mad." I let out a humorless laugh. "You're preaching to the choir, pal. It's madness, but these people take their loss seriously. I'm trying to keep both of us alive until we figure out a plan." We spoke in hushed tones, exchanging whatever information we had gleaned. Lucas had learned nothing more than I already knew, except that rumors about me had spread like cosmic wildfire, fueling both concern and curiosity throughout the city. In hushed corners, some called me the Harbinger or the Outsider, though the tone in which they said those names varied greatly. As the betrothal day approached, the tension in the air grew palpable. The city's inhabitants, curious to witness this unprecedented event, filled the suspended streets. They decorated the spires with floating lanterns that glowed with soft, pulsating colors and hung streaming banners depicting the royal crest, a stylized phoenix-like bird encircled by shimmering stars. Despite the cheerful decorations, there was an undercurrent of uncertainty, as though everyone was holding their breath, unsure of whether this union would be a blessing or a catastrophe. Finally, the day arrived. I was led to a ceremonial chamber on the eastern side of the city, where the first rays of dawn would shine directly upon the participants. The walls were formed of what looked like translucent crystal, capturing the morning light and refracting it into rainbow shards that danced across the floor. The gathered nobles and dignitaries wore their most resplendent attire, shimmering silks and robes sewn with crystals that caught the light with each subtle movement. At the front stood King Aurelius, wearing a towering crown of interwoven metals and gems, his face solemn as he gazed upon the assembly. Princess Seraphina entered, accompanied by a retinue of attendants who carried her train of glimmering fabric. She looked radiant, her alien features framed by an intricate headdress that seemed woven of living light. My heart pounded as she took her place beside me, her eyes flickering with equal parts determination and apprehension. A priest-like figure, robed in swirling gold and azure, began reciting the vows, invoking ancient cosmic forces, the blessings of the city's ancestors, and the unity of star and spire. I caught only fragments of the archaic language, though some essence of meaning seemed to seep into my mind, as though the words themselves had power. The moment arrived to speak. Seraphina went first, her voice cool but clear, pledging to guide the outsider, to teach him the ways of the city, to protect the realm from chaos, and to accept the bond that fate had set before her. Her voice echoed with a certain resignation, but also a sense of regal duty. Then all eyes fell upon me. My throat felt dry as I recited the vow that had been taught to me that very morning. "I, Ethan Kane, do solemnly bind myself to you, Princess Seraphina, for the sake of harmony, with a heart that seeks understanding, a mind that offers respect, and a hand that pledges aid." As I spoke, the crystal walls glowed brighter, and I sensed a subtle shift in the atmosphere, as though some ethereal current of energy pulsed through the city. The priest concluded the rite, and King Aurelius stepped forward, placing a slender circlet in my hands, a symbol of my new status as Seraphina's consort or royal spouse. The crowd erupted in applause, subdued though it was by the weight of tradition and the novelty of this union. At the celebratory reception, a lavish feast was laid out in a grand ballroom with a domed ceiling that offered panoramic views of the swirling clouds around the floating city. Live music, played on strange instruments akin to harps that glowed under deft fingers, filled the space with a melodic and haunting tune. I tried to mingle, though I felt like a curious exhibit in a galactic zoo. Dignitaries introduced themselves and tested my knowledge of their customs. Some were openly hostile, others politely intrigued. The tension was thick enough to slice with a ceremonial dagger. I noticed Serafina, seated on an elevated dais, conversing with a group of high nobles. She caught my eye and beckoned me over. As I approached, she excused herself from her entourage. For a moment, we stood side by side, gazing at the swirling clouds visible through the domed glass. "It is done," she said softly, her voice lost in the music that surrounded us. "It is," I replied, feeling the weight of the circlet on my head, the constriction of the formal attire that had been tailored for me. "How do you feel, Your Highness?" She hesitated. "I feel conflicted. We have bound ourselves to uphold a custom that was forged centuries ago, one that many question in modern times. Yet if we had not, blood would have been spilled. Perhaps this is for the best." I studied her face, seeing shadows of doubt in those luminous eyes. I realized with a pang of sympathy that she too was a victim of these circumstances. In the following days, we learned to navigate our new status. The city's populace reacted with a kaleidoscope of emotions. Some believed the union to be a good omen, a bridging of galaxies, while others considered it sacrilege that an off-worlder could ascend to a position of royalty by accident and insult. King Aurelius, for his part, seemed torn between relief that tradition had been maintained and concern over the fractious murmurs stirring among the nobility. What surprised me most was the slow, undeniable growth of camaraderie between Serafina and me. We began to speak more openly, discovering shared points of curiosity about each other's worlds. She was fascinated by Earth's blue skies, our multilunar nights in certain colonies, and the concept of oceans brimming with aquatic life. I found myself enthralled by her world's mastery of anti-gravity technology, the symbiotic bond her people had with the arc crystals, and the subtle telepathic aura that seemed to link many of them. In cautious increments, the forced marriage started to feel less like a yoke and more like an unexpected partnership. Inevitably, we stumbled upon secrets. Late one evening, while searching the palace archives for references to the ancient law that bound me to Serafina, we found records of political conspiracies woven through the centuries, attempted coups, sabotage attempts, and mysterious vanishings. It became apparent that not everyone accepted the great ruler's unyielding adherence to tradition. Some believed the monarchy's grip could be loosened, while others wanted it toppled entirely. And there, amidst the dusty scrolls and luminous data tablets, Serafina and I uncovered evidence that one faction in particular, led by a cunning noble named Lord Zarin, had been stirring unrest and eyeing the throne for years. The revelations were chilling. Zarin had systematically orchestrated dissent, capitalizing on the growing discontent among certain noble houses who chafed at Aurelius's unwavering laws. The forced betrothal, in Zarin's eyes, was an abomination, a perfect rallying cry to finally fracture the monarchy's support. Worse still, we learned that Zarin had a plan set in motion, a plan that might involve assassinating key members of the royal family, including Serafina and me, thus plunging the city into chaos and paving the way for his ascendancy. That night, as I paced the opulent hallway outside the archive room, the gravity of the situation weighed on my chest like a collapsing star. Serafina watched me with concern. "We must bring this to my father's attention," she said, her voice steady yet laced with urgency. I ran a hand through my hair, my mind racing. "We do, but we also need proof that's undeniable. If we confront him blindly, Zarin will deny everything, and we may find ourselves the targets of political subterfuge we can't handle." Serafina nodded, taking a deep breath. Her regal poise faltered, revealing the stress she was under. "Then let us gather the evidence we need, but we must act quickly. If Zarin senses we are onto him, it could accelerate his plans." Over the next few weeks, our lives turned into a covert operation. By day, we maintained the facade of royal decorum, attending galas, presiding over ceremonial rituals, and giving speeches about unity and harmony. By night, we delved into restricted archives, conspired with those few loyal advisors we trusted, and tried to piece together Zarin's network of co-conspirators. Lucas proved invaluable, especially once we managed to free him from his house arrest by convincing the king of his usefulness. Lucas had a knack for infiltration, for gleaning hidden truths from half-spoken phrases. He posed as a wayward court official seeking patronage, thereby gaining access to the underbelly of noble gossip. Bit by bit, he unearthed coded messages, discovered clandestine finances, and connected them to Zaren's estate. Each piece of evidence added a new link in the chain that implicated Zaren in treasonous activity. One evening, we received a tip that Zaren planned to meet with several of his co-conspirators at a secluded spire known as the Whispering Tower. The tower was famed for the unique acoustics of its winding interior. Secrets once whispered in its hidden chambers were said to linger in the air. Under the cover of darkness, Serafina and I, joined by a handful of guards we deeply trusted, made our way there. We took great pains to remain unseen, cloaking ourselves in plain robes and concealing our faces. Entering the tower, we navigated dimly lit corridors that spiraled upward. The air was thick with an eerie hush, and occasionally faint echoes drifted past, as though phantoms repeated words long since spoken. In the upper chamber, we found Zaren, accompanied by a group of high nobles. They spoke in hushed voices, but the tower's acoustics betrayed them. Standing in the shadows, we heard them discuss plots to incite riots among the laborers, sabotage critical anti-gravity machinery, and most damning of all, engineer a lethal accident for Serafina and the new consort. As the magnitude of their treachery became clear, we stepped forward, flanked by the guards. Serafina lifted her hood, revealing herself with an imperious glare. "Lord Zaren," she said, her voice echoing around the chamber, "your conspiracy stands exposed. Surrender now, and perhaps my father will show leniency." There was a moment of stunned silence, followed by chaos. Zaren's eyes blazed with hatred as he shouted for his allies to attack. A tumult ensued, the ring of energy staves and the crackle of some kind of plasma weapon jolting the still air. Our guards held off the conspirators, but Zaren made a desperate dash toward a side passage where an emergency skycraft awaited. I raced after him. We burst onto a narrow balcony, the swirling clouds below us illuminated by the city's gentle glow. There, Zaren clambered into a sleek craft that hovered precariously. I lunged forward, grappling for the craft's side. He aimed a small device at me, a pulse pistol of sorts, but I grabbed his arm and wrenched it away just as he fired. The shot went wide, fracturing part of the balcony's railing with a bright flash. The recoil caused him to lose balance, and he staggered, nearly plunging into the abyss of clouds. With surprising instinct, I grabbed him by the collar, preventing him from falling. For a heartbeat, we hung suspended on the edge of oblivion, the wind roaring around us, the craft swaying in uncertain arcs. Zaren snarled, his once dignified face distorted by desperation. "Release me," he hissed, "or we both fall." "I'll do no such thing," I managed, straining to hold him. "You will answer for your crimes." With a final burst of effort, I pulled him back onto the balcony, subduing him as the guards arrived to secure him in shackles. When we returned to the tower's central chamber, the conspirators had been captured. Their treacherous meeting had ended in utter failure, leaving them at the mercy of the throne. Serafina stood with her hood thrown back, regal fury etched into her expression. She looked both relieved and exhausted when she saw me, her eyes lingering on the battered state of my attire. In the aftermath, King Aurelius called a grand assembly in the city's largest arena, a place that could hold thousands of onlookers suspended on multiple tiers of floating platforms. The citizens gathered in curiosity and dread, uncertain of what the monarchy intended. Standing at the center, the king pronounced the criminal's guilt, presenting the evidence we had painstakingly gathered: financial records, coded correspondence, and eyewitness testimony. Zaren and his band of conspirators were sentenced to a life of exile, banished from the city and stripped of their titles. Once justice was delivered, King Aurelius turned to the crowd. "My people," he said, voice resonating through the amphitheater, "we stand at the threshold of great change. An ancient law has brought an outsider into our midst, forging a bond that was unthinkable mere weeks ago. Yet in that time he has proven his commitment to our safety, his willingness to understand our ways, and his devotion to our princess. Let this